I've rounded up some recent reviews and impressions. It's been a big couple of months with Jedi Survivor and Final Fantasy XVI, to name a few. You can use the chapters to skip to the one you're interested in, or sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Wow, this thing is epic.
Let's talk about Jedi Survivor, the good, the bad, and the great. We'll talk about the gameplay and graphics and glitches and all that, but I also want to completely nerd out on one of the aspects of the story and lore presented in this game. But don't worry, I'll warn you first. I will admit I'm a huge Star Wars fan, but I don't think that's a requirement for enjoying this game or this review. So let's start with the basics. This is the second title in the Star Wars Jedi series from Respawn and EA, and it feels in every way like the first game walked so this one could run. Traversal is more enjoyable, the worlds are intriguing, the combat feels more fluid, you get the idea. When I say traversal is more enjoyable, this is coming from a huge fan of the Uncharted series. In fact, I fell in love with the first few minutes of Jedi Fallen Order because I thought it was going to be a Nathan Drake in space adventure with a lot of climbing and clambering around. I was disappointed to find out that the rest of the game wasn't like that at all, but apparently Respawn felt the same way because this time around there's a lot, and I mean a lot, of climbing and clambering and hanging and wall running. Oh my god, there's so much wall running. The traversal in the game really highlights the key difference between Fallen Order and Survivor. Survivor is, gamey. It almost feels like a platformer at times with several sequences that require timed grapple pulls and jumps and stuff. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing. Of course, some of that could kind of pull you out of the immersion, like, why is this pterodactyl thing just floating here waiting on me? Or isn't it convenient that every time Cal reaches a dead end, there just happens to be a 30-foot wall curved at just the right angle to reach the one section of wall with exposed rebar? But you forgive it because it's fun. It's a lot of fun, and Respawn has sprinkled fun into this Space Wars game in every corner. There's fun in the combat, where new stances and moves give you an extra layer of choices to make. There's fun in dodging and parrying because it's rewarding and often necessary. The whole of it just looks awesome. There's fun in feeling like a badass Jedi mowing through enemies with acrobatic jumps and flashy saber strikes. And the saber throw. Oh, I will never get tired of throwing my saber at someone. There's fun in riding a chocobo. I know they're called Nekus, but I played Final Fantasy VII for the first time this year, so I'm an expert on chocobos now, and that's a chocobo. There's fun in silly characters like Scuba, the fish guy, and Turgle. Oh man, Turgle is the best. Or when Bode sounds all thirsty for Cal.
Would it like to see you scrapping ships on Braca in your younger days?
Take a cold shower, Bode. There's fun in collecting seeds and growing a rooftop garden. Well, wait, no, scratch that. I don't understand why that's in the game at all, but hey, it's in there if you want a little Stardew Valley in your Star Wars. The fun is why it's easy to forgive some of the game's dark side. And yes, the game has considerable flaws, particularly on the technical side. It's well reported now that the game is all but unplayable on PC at launch for a lot of people, and I defer you to SkillUp's review with a link in the description if you want to know more about that. I played it on a PS5, and I can only review the game that I played, and I can honestly say I had some minor issues, but nothing that was game-breaking. There were graphical tears, weird artifacts, and oddly enough performance mode didn't seem to do much to improve the performance. I stuck to quality mode at a steady 30 frames per second, and the game looked beautiful, but I'm really hoping a patch will get this game playing at a smooth 60 frames per second at some point down the road. Recent games like Redfall have been raked over the coals for launching with a 30 FPS max, so it's a bit unfair to let Survivor get a pass when clearly this game is massively undercooked in the optimization department. There were also the standard things you see in a lot of games, like floating corpses, invisible walls and doors, and there's this one spot near my home base where I always seem to get stuck, but these sort of issues were few and far between and pretty common in most games. Another thing it has in common with a lot of games these days are the Metroidvania aspects, where you'll find yourself learning new tricks and retracing your steps to access areas and items that were off limits earlier in the game. This is a tried and true mechanic in gaming, but honestly, I've always despised it. It just seems lazy to me, like the developers are intentionally adding all this backtracking just to extend the playtime, as though a longer completion time equals more enjoyment. But the way these Metroidvania elements are presented here, I don't know that it bothered me. It's not as tedious to get back to previous locations like it was in Fallen Order, and the map is great at communicating what you can or can't do, or where you can go, And at the end of the day, a lot of the stuff you'd go back for are optional anyway, and not necessary for completing the story. Oh man, the story. Let's dig into that. The first game was an origin story, and was neatly framed within the established plot points of the movies and TV shows, with Order 66 on one end of the timeline, and Inquisitors on the other. This time around, Cal spends most of his time exploring the Outer Rim away from the more established storylines. This gives the game freedom to explore stories and characters that are new, fresh, and completely at home in the Star Wars galaxy. In that way, it's similar to the recent Andor series that also explored everyday life under the thumb of the Empire, but at least here each character's fate is still unknown. The core group from the first game has split up, Merrin to explore and learn about the galaxy on her own terms and find herself, Cere and her old master to recover as much of the Jedi knowledge as possible before it's lost for good. Grease opened a saloon and tried to retire in peace. But under the Empire, trouble finds a way, even in the Outer Rim. Cal? He's been spending the last few years fighting alongside Saw Gerrera, whom he met in the events of Fallen Order. If you're not familiar with Star Wars lore, Saw is a guerrilla fighter whose tactics are too brutal and his views too extremist to be included in the circles that eventually form the Rebel Alliance. Which is probably why Cal is a ruthless murderer. Yeah, he's killing bad guys, but we're talking thousands of bad guys. He even kills every animal that doesn't nuzzle him or offer him rides. The game almost addresses this by mentioning that the Empire calls him a terrorist, but never seriously tackles the implications of a Jedi, a keeper of peace and justice in the galaxy, going in and out of hiding to wreak havoc, destruction, and death on a monumental scale. That's one of the things I love so much about Ghost of Tsushima. The struggle of changing one's tactics in the face of overwhelming forces, even if it means going against tradition or sacred culture, is at the heart of Tsushima's story. I feel like there is a huge opportunity here to tackle a similar dilemma in the responsibility of being a Jedi. The game does touch on the decision between staying in the fight versus finding peace, but finding a place to hide and live a peaceful life is seen as selfish, just like Jyn Erso in Rogue One.
It's not a problem if you don't look up.
Staying in the fight, like Cal, is seen as a selfless act done for the good of everyone suffering under the Empire. But is it? Isn't Cal falling under the same false pretense that led to the fall of the Jedi Order in the first place? This is where I'm going to nerd out on Star Wars lore, so if you want to skip this part, go to
9-minute and 9-second mark.
As Master Windu and the rest of the Jedi Council became more aggressive and militarized, they lost sight of the place the Jedi held in the galaxy, to maintain order and balance. And in their obsession with politics and warmongering, they were blind to the largest threat of all, an entire government, the structure of civilization across the galaxy, being infiltrated and overrun by the Sith. In the blink of an eye, the very tools the Jedi used to wage war were turned against them and very nearly wiped them out. Cal is a product of Order 66, his life completely and permanently shaped by that catastrophic event. Which is why it's interesting to me that we see him at the beginning of this story doing the same things, making the same mistakes, all in the guise of a Jedi doing the right thing, the so-called selfless thing. The Star Wars canon has conflicting information when it comes to aggression versus pacifism. Luke Skywalker himself almost makes the same mistake as the Jedi Order in its final days, but in his moment of victory over Vader, he realizes the error in his ways, that murder and violence cannot be cured by more murder and violence. It's a great message. Luke has learned about peace and balance, and in this moment, he learns about restraint and compassion. And then the Emperor nearly fries him to a crisp, and Luke is left begging his father to not be a pacifist and save his peaceful ass. Which Vader does, spurred on by the love in his heart for the son he never knew. So which is it? What the hell was Luke supposed to have learned from that whole ordeal? Can a perfect Jedi strike a final blow if he only uses his powers for knowledge and defense?
A Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack.
It's no wonder that 30 years later he's a hermit on an island in the middle of nowhere. Is the role of a Jedi to bring peace or to execute justice? Can both be done at the same time? But wait, we're talking about Jedi Survivor here. Cal Kestis is out here fighting the good fight, severing heads and limbs and kicking ass against both stormtroopers and repurposed separatist droids. He stands up for people at times, but mainly he's just doing all the stuff we wish we could do if we were in a Star Wars story. Hell, even alien chicks dig him. This is wish fulfillment at its highest order, and in that regard the game totally sticks the landing. But story-wise, the series has Jedi right in the title, but this doesn't seem to be a game about a Jedi. Is that because Cal's story isn't finished yet? Will he become more Jedi-like in future installments? More importantly, would those games even be fun to play? EA and Respawn have a lot to figure out in that department. In the meantime, Jedi Survivor is a fantastic game. It's very nearly a Star Wars fan's ultimate gaming experience, but it's still a great space adventure game even if you don't know or care about Star Wars. The problem is in the details, or more specifically, the performance. The PC launch was absolutely unforgivable, and even the console versions were a bit rough around the edges. But if the game runs stable for you, it's packed with just enough fun and fantasy to make you forget the flaws. I give it a thumbs up.
The creators of Boltgun didn't overthink the title of their game because they didn't overthink their game. This is a very simple shooter with a very simple premise, but it does the very difficult task of being a great shooter. I'm not kidding. There are a couple of things that keep it from being truly great, but we'll get to those in a moment. Warhammer 40,000 Boltgun is a retro-inspired shooter that's modeled after 90s games like Quake and Doom, right down to the pixelated monsters and blocky levels. These games are generally referred to as boomer shooters, and this is as boomer shooter as it gets. It's set in the Warhammer 40k universe and is sort of a light appetizer before Space Marine 2 comes out later this year. By light appetizer, I mean this isn't a full price game and this isn't a full price experience. I played this right after playing Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and believe me, this is the exact opposite kind of game. You don't interact with the world other than activating elevators, opening doors, and finding the keys that go to those doors. And to be totally honest, that was pretty refreshing. There's no quiet exploration here or a mystery box storytelling. There's just a bunch of monsters, bullets, blood, and doors that need unlocked. If you're a fan of boomer shooters, or if you're a fan of Warhammer 40k, then this is a must play, full stop. Like, finish the video of course, give me a thumbs up, all that stuff, but otherwise stop what you're doing and go get this $25 game on Xbox, Switch, PlayStation, or PC. But if you're not sold on those 2 points alone, then hear me out. Yeah, boomer shooters are a dime a dozen, and some of the charm is lost if you're not a Warhammer fan. But damn, this is a hell of a lot of fun in its own right. Somehow this game has a feel to it all its own. You feel like a shooting god cutting a swath of destruction across this blocky world. It reminded me what gaming used to be like before skins and season passes and games that just don't work on day one. This is a blatant throwback to a simpler time when developers just wanted to make fun games because your level of fun was the only currency that mattered. To keep things enjoyable, health and ammo is plentiful, unless you're on the harder difficulty settings. The chainsword is always available, and hell, one of the guns doesn't even need to be reloaded. There's no cosmetics, or attachments, or skill trees, or NPCs, or side quests. There's just a few weapons and a shit ton of monsters to annihilate with impunity. And the annihilation is glorious. Korok Digital haven't made a shooter before as far as I can tell, but you never know that playing Boltgun. One problem I have with these games is sometimes there's so much going on that you can't really keep track of what's actually happening. But no matter how frantic it got in Boltgun, the action was always easy to follow. And the controls are fluid, like in a way that very few shooters pull off. I don't know enough about dead zones and aim assists and the stuff that goes on behind the scenes, but to me there's a very noticeable difference in the way shooters with pedigree feel versus all the other shooters out there. But the controls here feel like what Bungie would do if they made this kind of game. Okay, they did make this kind of game back in the 90s, but I'm talking about modern Bungie here. This isn't a side project from Treyarch or a new studio with former developers from DICE. This is an indie studio with no prior shooters in their portfolio, and I think that deserves some recognition. Like, holy shit, make some more of these. But next time around, there are a couple of areas that could use some improvement. The first area that needs improvement, and for me the most important, is the level design. I think the levels are intentionally bland to help the action and the ammo stand out, and that part is fine, but I'm talking about the physical layout. It's bad enough that each level reuses rooms and corridors and assets, but what makes it worse is that most of these levels incorporate a lot of symmetry, so it's easy to get turned around and not know which way you are going or which way you are coming from, because it's all exactly the same. There are very few identifying markers in the level. I mean, even a strong light source would go a long way, and anywhere you look is probably identical to a few other spots on the same level. But this complaint probably isn't a surprise to the developers, because more than once I saw arrows on the ground or on the wall and they just felt out of place, like they were slapped on at the last minute. The second area of improvement for me would be the lack of variety after about halfway through the game. You're seeing new enemies and picking up new weapons pretty consistently for the first several hours, but somewhere along the way there stopped being very much in the new category. But it's not a long game, so it's not like you have to slog through a lot. The graphics and presentation were really crisp for me. I've already mentioned how easy it was to follow the action on the screen, and it's oozing with the kind of art direction I expect with a Warhammer property. I preferred the default pixelization setting, but even that can be turned down for a more modern look. Sound-wise, my Space Marine and his weapons sounded chunky and menacing. Atmospheric sounds were a little sparse, but I think that's because I reviewed this on a Switch, and based on what I've read, there's a good chance it sounds better and more engaging on the other platforms. I was totally enthralled by the first half of this game, in a way I did not expect from a game with such a bare-bones approach. Even the repetitiveness of the rest of it wasn't enough to erase the fact that those first 6 hours, they were as enjoyable as any shooter I've played this year. Sure, I love games with lots of game modes and huge open worlds to explore, and I'm not saying this is on par with AAA heavyweights, but for $25, this game has an extremely focused experience, and I'm here for it. I give it a bloody thumbs up, and I cannot wait to see what Auroch Digital does next. If you play this on the Switch like I did, and you want to be able to play with it with a standard PlayStation or Xbox controller, check out my video on how to do that. I'm confused about this Advance Wars 1+2 reboot camp game because I love it, but there was one thing I was worried about when I picked it up. Is this a classic that belongs in any strategy lover's catalog, or is it a nostalgia cash grab? After playing it now, I can honestly say maybe it's both. This game is a remake of a pair of strategy games released on the Game Boy Advance 20 years ago, and the reboot is available only on the Nintendo Switch. I've always loved turn-based, grid-based military strategy games, and even though I didn't play this back in the day, I felt right at home as soon as I picked it up because it was so much like a game that I loved, Military Madness, from the good old TurboGrafx-16. Seriously, these games are a lot alike, so much so I knew exactly what the units did before I even selected them. One thing that wasn't immediately obvious to me was the story and characters in the game. There's these nations at war with each other, but the commanding officers talk to each other after the battles, and they're totally flippant about the wars. I don't even know what's going on here. Am I supposed to believe there are people in the tanks and there are people out there dying? Or are these toys on a game board? The whole thing's presented in this like wooden game box, but it's never explained in the game why or what's going on here. Now, I realize a game about tanks and death and destruction and war was probably problematic back on the Game Boy Advance, and fun fact, this game was released in the US one day before the 9/11 attacks. And even in modern days, obviously with the Russian invasion of Ukraine going on, I'm sure Nintendo wants to distance this game from actual real world war. So I understand why they give kind of this cartoon aesthetic to it and they take away a lot of that realism. That makes total sense, but even still, I don't understand the relationship between these characters or what's really going on in the story, and so I was never able to get invested in why this character used to be friends and they're not anymore, and there's this like love triangle and who's on whose side. It's intentionally confusing, but it's also never really explained. So that part was just frustrating to me. The gameplay itself is incredible. I mean, if you came here for the turn-based strategy, you came to the right place because this is a lot of fun. You move your units around on a square grid, which is a little bit simpler. Each unit can only be attacked from 4 sides. A lot of these games that I play are more of a hex grid, which means you can be attacked from 6 sides. So that simplifies the movement a little bit, it simplifies the decision making. This game does a great job of easing you into the different strategies involved. Again, I'm familiar with these kinds of games, so I was able to pick it up and play it pretty quickly, but It definitely will ease you in if you're new to it. And it has a casual mode that's new to the game, or you can play in the slightly more difficult classic mode. But it's very newcomer friendly in that regard. But it definitely has that easy to learn, difficult to master flavor to it. So if you are a veteran, or if you do want to spend more time with it, it's definitely going to be challenging. The game mechanics themselves are so strong, it's really a testament to just how good the original games were. The online mode is a nice addition, and the new art style is really easy on the eyes. It's got this kind of cross between American and Japanese animation style, which is really cool considering this is a game about these sort of generic nations. It's not meant to represent any actual geographic place. So the kind of blended art style works really well. There's even a level editor included, so you can create new maps to play with your friends, but unfortunately you can't really set up AI and just play against the computer. So you get the first 2 games in the GBA series. You get online multiplayer, you get a map editor, you get new graphics, new voiceovers. On paper, it sounds like a great deal, but keep in mind this game does not vary much. There's not much you're doing in hour 40 that you weren't already doing in hour 2. So there's just not a lot of variety here. And all in all, even though it's 2 complete games, I don't really feel like there's a lot of content here, which is why I think this game should have been $20 or $30. I just can't get behind a full $59 price tag on this. Which gets me back to my original concern. Is this game worth it? I can honestly say I have played mobile games with almost as much content for under $5. But what do I know? By all accounts, this game is doing great. I think it sold something like 400,000 units in its first week, at least in its early release window. For a game that hasn't had a new entry, or a series that hasn't had a new entry in 15 years in a fairly niche genre, to sell that many copies is a great sign for Nintendo. And there's got to be conversations going on over there about the next 2 games in the series or other games in this category, which is great. Bring it on. But for $59, I want a new game. I want a new experience. I want ranked online play. I want a map editor with AI enemies. There's so many things that could be added to this game. New COs, new scenarios, a new campaign. That's what I want to pay $59 for. This as a reboot, a remake, whatever you want to call it, it is essentially new graphics on the old games. There's very little else added to it. The voiceovers are nice, but again, the story is so strange and bizarre, the scenario. I'm just here for the maps. I'm just here for the campaign, maybe a little bit of multiplayer. I don't even plan to play this game against friends locally or anything like that. Until a new one comes out, I'll keep playing this one because this game is awesome. I love this game, which is why I'm so confused. I'll keep playing it. I'll keep wondering, was it worth it? I'll keep wondering, why is there a little kid commanding soldiers on the field of battle inside a little wooden game box against enemies who like him or something? I don't know. I'm so confused by it. I give it a thumbs up and all that. It's a great game, but I do think it's massively overpriced. I'm really confused about how to square that away with how much I enjoy playing the game. Does that make it worth the money? I just don't see how the amount of content in this package can be sold and priced for the same amount as like a Mario game. It's just nowhere near the same level of content to experience in it. So please hit me up in the comments. Tell me if I'm crazy. If you played it, do you feel like you got your money's worth? I'm genuinely sad the XDefiant open beta is over. I haven't had this much fun jumping into a new online shooter in a long time. I didn't take a lot of clips while I was playing because honestly I didn't expect to like it this much, but I'll have some clips to show you as well as some of the official footage, but I wanted to go over a few of my first impressions after playing a few hours of the open beta this week. I knew this game was going to play a lot like Call of Duty. What I wasn't ready for is how much they drew from Overwatch. And I'm not talking about Overwatch 2 and the heavy monetization crap. I'm talking about the escort the package thing and having special abilities and an ultimate. It was really cool to see those elements in a Call of Duty style game. But obviously Call of Duty is the true source of inspiration here, and I feel like they did a really good job of trying to recapture a little bit of the magic that Activision has been sort of ignoring these days. It's tightly focused on 6v6, the maps are well balanced, and the lack of skill-based matchmaking really shined through. It was a really cool part of the whole experience. I got wrecked in one match, and then in the very next one I reeled off like 33 kills. It was awesome. And the maps were really cool. They had that kind of zany feel to them. It reminded me of like the DLC packs to the Call of Duty games back in the glory days, where you'd get like this strange zoo or a theme park or something like that. There were a lot of kind of cool, colorful maps in this, and I said they were well balanced. I mean, they had great lanes, they had good action going on through them. I was just really, really impressed with the map design in the game. It's cross-platform. I tried it on both a PlayStation 5 and an Xbox Series S, and my loadouts and stats carried over without a hitch between the two, so that worked seamless, even in the open beta. It'll be free to play on all platforms, and that's really the one thing that concerns me. I mean, if it's going to be free to play, then how obnoxious are those microtransactions going to be? I don't think they've given all the details on that yet. They claim it'll always be free to play, never pay to win, but I don't know, man. I guess I'll just believe that when I see it. Everybody's got numbers to hit. I have seen some complaints about hitboxes and aiming for over long distances and accuracy and stuff like that, and I think part of that are going to be some wrinkles that they iron out in as they go past the open beta phase. But then another part of that is I just think the aim assist is not as strong in this game, and I do think that's by design, and I do think a lot of people are going to be happy with that, especially if you're playing on a PC. Is it a Call of Duty killer? I mean, just based on an open beta and a few hours of playing, I'd say no. I don't think Activision's sweating in their seats or anything, but I do think there will be a sizable number of Call of Duty players who miss the old movement style or miss the skill-based matchmaking as it existed 10 years ago versus how it is today. I think there will be a lot of people who enjoy playing this game. I don't know if that's gonna even put a dent in Call of Duty, but it doesn't matter. If this game can be successful, then I'm all for more choice. They haven't announced a specific release date, just sometime this summer on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and PC, and I'm really looking forward to it. I can't wait to jump back into these games. So yeah, that's it. Just a quick impression. I didn't spend a whole lot of time, probably 3 to 4 hours in the beta, but I had a blast with it, and I feel like there's a lot of potential here. I just finished the Final Fantasy XVI demo, and I thought I'd share my thoughts coming from someone who hasn't played much Final Fantasy and until recently never really played Japanese-style RPGs. I really didn't know what to expect from it, but I've had a pretty good grasp of what the game was going for. I just wasn't sure how well it would pull it off. First of all, wow, this thing is epic. It's packed with story, it has top-notch voice acting, and it really sells the new combat system. It's really 2 demos in one. You get to play the first hour and a half or so of the game, and then there's also the challenge level that I think was made specifically for this demo. The prologue sets up the story, it eases you into the combat gently, and then the challenge mode gives you a taste of what combat is going to be like later in the game. The pacing in this thing is incredible. It's not something I've ever really thought about in a demo before, but this thing whips you around in such an interesting way. There's this spectacle of a godlike creatures in a fight to the death, and there's a quiet moment before battle, there's political intrigue, in a few moments you're back to the spectacle, and that's just the opening of the damn thing. Sometimes when games like this really go all out and go for an epic story, you end up with something that's incoherent, or they get so focused on the cool visuals that there's no story to tie it together. This is different. I actually got a bit of the Game of Thrones vibe, believe it or not, but through a Final Fantasy lens. There are castles and politics and bloodlines, but there are also super expensive haircuts. Seriously, what is with all the hair? I'm really gonna sound like an outsider here, but it's such an anachronism to me that these hairstyles are on people who live in a society that doesn't even have indoor plumbing. But I digress. The demo introduces you to a bunch of characters, you get a good feel for the world and the stakes, and the story has hooks. It's like watching the first few episodes of a new show or something. I mean, it's literally like watching a new show because there's about an hour's worth of cutscenes here. But I already care about the hero, I want to see what he has to go through, and I feel like he has been through a lot in just the few hours I've had with the game. The prologue eases you into the new combat system, and I think it's done in a way that would be accessible to newer gamers. Like, even the camera was a little clunky. It sort of reminded me of the PS2 era games that assumed you didn't know how to use a thumbstick while moving around. You get a taste of the combat in the prologue, but once this part's done, you unlock what's called the Icon Challenge mode. The prologue does a great job of setting up the story, but this is where the combat shines. In this level, you get to see what it's like to manage multiple power sets and cooldowns, and I think I mentioned the combat feels fluid, and that's really the best way I can describe it. There's a rhythm to it that's satisfying, and it was challenging but never too difficult. Now, if I'm saying it wasn't too difficult, then I'm sure there are people out there saying it was too easy. This is not Souls-like combat, at least it wasn't for me, and that's where the difficulty adjustments come in. One of my favorite things about this game is the way it approaches difficulty settings, which is to say, it doesn't have any. But it doesn't gatekeep the enjoyment behind some sort of get good requirement. Like I said, this game feels somewhat friendly to newer gamers in general, so it does something that's really interesting. There are in-game items that can simplify the combat. I was given a ring somewhere along the way that slowed down time and gave me an on-screen prompt when I needed to dodge, and it made the combat much more enjoyable. If that's too easy for you, just don't equip the ring. The game doesn't care. There's a story to be told here and enemies to slay, so you just do you and figure out what works best. It's a pretty cool way to adjust the challenge level, and I love it. This is hands down the best demo I've ever played. They've managed to make me feel invested in the story, the progress I've made will transfer over to the full game, and there are no limits to how often or how long I play the demo. And I really want to know what happens next. I know you can't judge a full game on just a prologue and a challenge mode, but there's no doubt in my mind now, I'm gonna love this game. What more can you ask for from a demo? And if you enjoyed this video, there's a good chance you'll enjoy some of my other content, so hit that subscribe button, take a poke around, and thanks for watching.